Hi, and welcome to our ninth in a continuing series on the book of Shmuel, or Samuel, and the founding of Jewish monarchy. Episode 9. This is the chapter you've been waiting for. Sorry, chapter 7 wasn't recorded. We finally begin the transition to a king and a royal line, and it is perplexing and mystifying. How is it possible that Shmuel allows his sons to not follow in his ways when he saw firsthand the results of Eli and Eli's children? Why would the people who clearly identify the problem with dynastic leadership expressly request dynastic leadership? Where does the mishpat Hamelech that Shmuel shares with them come from? And perhaps most surprising, if Hashem tells Shmuel to listen to the people and appoint a king, and he tells him twice, why does the chapter end with Samuel's failure to do so? All this and more. Thanks for joining us, and please consider sharing this recording with others.
Okay, so we'll do super fast recap of where we are at. So chapter 1 was we'll call it like not miraculous but semi-impressive birth of Shmuel, unexpected, that came about through the prayers of his mother Hannah, and then into the second parak we saw that Hannah's really trying to position him as some sort of leader, maybe a potential king, something along those lines. We then get into the difference between Shmuel, who's now being raised by Eli in the Mishkan, and Shmuel and Eli's sons. Shmuel is fantastic and doing better and better, and Eli's sons are the exact opposite. They're essentially running the kahuna into the ground. Finally, we get first the rebuke of Eli, then the rebuke of Eli to his sons, then the rebuke of Eli about his sons, and finally the prophecy of Shmuel, that it's curtains for you and your whole family. And what follows from there is essentially the fulfillment of the prophecy, the destruction of the house of Eli, the loss of the Mishkan. What's that? I'm sorry. Yeah, the loss of the destruction of the Mishkan, the loss of the Aron. Yes.
You started without me. Oh my goodness. No respect. Ah, Sadik.
I saw Rodney Dangerfield once in concert.
Did you?
Pretty funny.
Once.
Not
and
as,
only once.
not as
I
funny
get
as
no
I
respect.
saw Jackie Mason the next night.
Okay, so that takes us to chapters 5 and 6, which were the Aron in captivity, and essentially Aron causing a plague to the Plishtim and the gods of the Plishtim, which precipitated the Plishtim sending the Aron back. And then at the end of chapter 6, the Aron is now back among the Jews, and then that took us to chapter 7, where we have Shmuel essentially coming into his own as a leader of the Jewish people. He goes out, so he calls all the people together to do teshuvah. They all do teshuvah, and the Plishtim use that as an opportunity to go attack the Jewish people. And the response is, well, we'll daven, we'll offer up these korbanos, and Hashem just essentially routs the Plishtim, and the Jews go chasing after them. And Shmuel and the Jewish people are victorious and take back the land that the Plishtim had taken from the Jews. And that got us to the end of chapter 7.
Did we come up with any kind of summation why there were disasters happening before everything was cool?
Why there were disasters?
You said, you'd think that the Jews have the Aron back, like everything's going to be awesome now. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And then, like, there's a huge plague and all these people get killed. Like, did we ever come to a consensus?
No, so when David brings it, we'll talk about that when David brings the Aron back permanently to Yerushalayim and Ir David. One of the things that we started to mention in chapter 4, and then I think elaborate a little bit more in 5 and 6, is this undercurrent of essentially a redo of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The question we posed is, what do you need chapters 5 and 6 for? Just summarize it by saying the Aron was captured, God sent some plagues against the Plishtim, and they returned the Aron, right? Why do I need to know the intricacies of the Plishtim got hemorrhoids and the whole story? And the answer was, essentially, we're trying to recreate the Yetzias Mitzrayim story. The Plishtim themselves identify them. They say, oh, this is like the God who brought the plagues on Egypt. He's bringing a plague on us. And really, it even started earlier in chapter 4, where the sons of Eli essentially are fulfilling the role of Paro. That just like Paro's heart was hardened and he didn't have any Bechira, the sons of Eli are not able to do Teshuvah even if they wanted to. And they're described as not listening to Hashem the same way Paro is described as not listening to Hashem. Then the question became, well, what is the point of having this redo of Yetzias Mitzrayim? Like, why is that the undercurrent of chapters 5 and 6? And one of the things that I was trying to argue for is that the reason it's there is to help lead you into chapter 7, which is essentially Shmuel as Moshe, right? So just like Yetzias Mitzrayim created this the Moshe that we know, so the Yetzias Mitzrayim of chapters 5 and 6 in Sefer Shmuel helps lead us to chapter 7, where Shmuel essentially becomes Moshe. There's I'll give you some more meat on the bones to that comparison. There are a few midrashim that pick up on the similarities between Moshe and Shmuel. You have the Medrash Shachar Tov 1:3, the Yalkut Shimoni and Yirmiyahu 292. But I think some of these comparisons we can kind of pick up for ourselves, really starting with the first parak, or well, actually, it's really the second parak after Shmuel is born. So it's unusual in general to get the full life story of a Navi. Usually the Navi shows up and you don't get the backstory of how that Navi was born. Certainly what you don't get, and only get by Moshe and Shmuel, is the story of the Navi being nursed, right? Shmuel and Moshe are the only two where we get this like fixation on the fact that they are nursed by their mother and then given over to someone who is not a family member to raise them, right, outside of the house, in essentially the highest office of the land, whether it's the Kohen Gadol or the king of Egypt. But the child, who is referred to as a nar, even though nar, we said, is really usually an older age, but both Moshe and Shmuel are referred to as a nar when they are very, very young, like in the bassinet. They are nursed by their mother and then given up to go to be raised in someone else's house. Some of the other comparisons that you get are the experience of hearing HaKadosh Baruch Hu speak to them and being confused. Moshe, by the sneh. Shmuel doesn't understand that it's Hashem speaking to him. You don't get something like that by, let's say, Yaakov, where he.
This is a holy place. I didn't even know. Like,
right.
He knows.
Right. He doesn't understand that God is. He doesn't misunderstand that God is speaking to him.
Let me see something about like the first time you get a nevuah. So Moshe's first nevuah is by the sneh.
Moshe's first nevuah is by the sneh.
And that was Shmuel's first nevuah.
Yes.
Sometimes when you get, I think it's pointed out that the first nevuah, it's not clear.
Oh, that's interesting.
Those were first nevuahs.
Okay.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
similarities are being done why?
So we're going to get to that too. But let's just go through a few more of them. Okay, both Levium, who judge the people, they're both described as Ne'man. Moshe is B'chol Beisi Ne'man. Shmuel is referred to as Ne'man, that he's trusted by God. They also both have their first nevuah after a long absence of prophecy. So the Jews of Mitzrayim haven't had prophecy. Shmuel, it's described as that prophecy was yakar in those days. It doesn't mean that no one had prophecy. It means it was very rare, unusual. The same thing by Moshe. Chazal tell us that Miriam had a prophecy that Moshe was going to be the leader of the people. It's not that there was no prophecy.
Yakar means rare?
Yakar, we'll say rare, yeah. That's
the steakhouse in Brooklyn, Yakar.
Oh yeah? That's great.
I know.
Now it makes. There you go.
That's cool.
Let's see. So some of this we haven't gotten to yet, but we'll see in the next parak or so. The end of their lives, they gather everybody together and basically say, if anyone has any claims that I took their stuff, this is the time to place them. They also both fight against Amalek, but are not the ones who are directly fighting against Amalek. There's someone else who's actually doing the warring while they are in charge and involved. Shmuel does maybe the end, but the actual war.
He basically is, he's apparently very handy with a butterfly knife.
Yeah, we'll get to all of that. They are also both, and this is kind of an interesting phenomenon in general. They are leaders who their sons don't take their place, right? We'll see this in the parak we're about to read, that Shmuel's sons don't go in his way, and therefore it's time for a different leader. The same thing goes for Moshe. Moshe's sons don't take over for him. So it sounds like they weren't They didn't follow in his footsteps. There's Chazal talk about.
Not off the derech.
So Chazal talk about at least one of his sons, or maybe his grandson, was actually a priest in a non-Jewish, in Pesel Micha.
Midian or no?
No. In Pesel Micha is like this idol that they brought with them from Mitzrayim. It ends up at the end of Shoftim leading some people astray, but the priest over there is described as Ben Menashe, but the word in the Tanakh when it's written, the nun is like kind of suspended. And Chazal explained that it's really supposed to say Ben Moshe, but it doesn't want to, implicate Moshe, but it's really Moshe's son, because Moshe had made this commitment to Yisro that he was going to make sure his kids had the opportunity to check out all the other Avodah Zaras, and Menashe, or whatever this guy's name was, stuck with...
liked what he saw.
Yeah, he liked what he saw.
That also, by the way, the New Testament compares Jesus to Shmuel.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was a stipulation Moshe did with Yisro?
Yeah, that's a medrash from Chazal. There are a few psukim that compare Moshe and Shmuel. We have in, let's see, it's in Yirmiyahu somewhere. Yeah, Tehillim 99:6 and Yirmiyahu 15:1 compare Moshe and Shmuel directly, and finally we'll get at the end of Shaul's life. Sorry for the spoiler alert here, but Shaul calls Shmuel up from the dead, and Chazal tell us that when Shmuel gets called up from the dead, he wants to bring somebody with him because he thinks it's the Yom Hadin. So who does he bring with him? Moshe, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of other midrashim that kind of compare the two. Professor Keel in the Dot Mikra brings
Doesn't
everything
the
down. If you're
Gemara-
going to see it extensively. Yeah, there's a Gemara in Chagiga 4b.
That says explicitly.
Yeah, in Yamo Moshe Ushmuel Zelevi Ze Bana Mizbeach Ze Bana Mizbeach. It goes through a whole bunch of comparisons between Shmuel and Moshe. So the claim that I'm trying to make is that just like we needed Yetzias Mitzrayim to produce a Moshe, we need chapters 5 and 6 to bring us into chapter 7, where Shmuel essentially becomes the Shmuel version of Moshe. And then what happens is what unfortunately also happened to Moshe. The Jews reject him, right? In the Chumash, as soon as there's problems, the Jews say, let's appoint another leader and we'll head back to Mitzrayim. So we're going to encounter now in Perek Ches, the Jews also rejecting Shmuel and opting to appoint a different leader.
Before we move on from chapter
Please.
7, Charles was saying that when they first came back, that our own
First it went to Beit Shemesh and it killed a bunch of people.
But I thought the reason, I was just looking at chapter 7 because I missed last class. I was
Yeah.
trying to review it.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like, I thought maybe because at that time they were doing tshuva in chapter 7.
In chapter 7 they do teshuvah.
Right, so
After the Aaron comes back in chapter 6. Chapter 7, the Jews go to Shmuel and say, like, it's time, we want to do teshuvah, and Shmuel takes them to mitzvah and says, okay.
Isn't that the reason then that the Aaron then is good in the new place, because they did tshuva?
So the Aaron comes to rest before the Jews do teshuvah. What's interesting, and we'll try to explain it, although I don't profess to have a really good answer to this, is that the Aaron stays for 20 years in this guy's house until David takes the Aaron back to Yerushalayim.
7 years into his reign.
Right.
He doesn't take it back to Yerushalayim. He brings it to
He brings it to Yerushalayim. Thank you. Why is that? Why during the career of Shmuel and Shaul, why don't they do something about the location of the Aron? And maybe it's just because so many people died that they're scared. Mm-hmm. But if the people have done teshuvah and they have a navi, maybe there's.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I guess.
Like,
I guess. I don't profess.
If there's
to
a
have a good
massive
answer.
plague and it's going on and it's killing people and you're going around like, what do we do? What do we do? And then they bring it to Frank's house and Frank's like, yeah, it can hang here as long as it wants and like everything's cool. They're like, all right, Frank, it's on you.
Yeah.
What was the name of the guy whose house it was?
Frank.
No, it was like
It records the name of the guy.
Yeah, it was like
I don't
Avinadav.
remember.
It was one of the names, or maybe it was
nickname was
Elazar.
Frank.
It was like one of the names of Aaron HaKohen's son.
It's both.
Right.
Avinadav and his son Elazar ben Avinadav.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Nickname Frank.
without much further ado, we will pick up at chapter 8, Pasuk Aleph. Vahi kasher zaken Shmuel, and it's now that Shmuel is old, and we know that Shmuel's not really old. He ends up dying at 52. Vayasem es banav shoftim Yisrael.
52 back then was old.
52 was definitely old back in the day. That's fair.
How would you think he is here? Right here
So I think Shaul reigns for what, like 2.5 years? Yeah, so he's probably in his late 40s, let's say. Vayasim as banav shoftim Yisrael, and he appoints his sons as judges over the Jewish people. Vayihi Shem beno habachor Yoel. The name of his older son is Yoel, and usually when you get an older son, you get a younger son. But here, the Shem Mishnehu Avia, and the name of his understudy, his second, but like second as if you're going to a duel and you need like a backup guy.
Second to his father.
Something like that, is Avia Shoftim Be'er-Sheva, and they are judges in Beer-Sheva, and the Septuagint, I think, here has them actually in two different locations. The Beer-Sheva is to the south, so there's one version of this where there's one in the north and one in the south.
Right.
Could the weird language just be like an atypical relationship? Like, could Shmuel have had possibly 2 wives or something, and this is the second son, who's like not the second son from the first wife? Maybe it's the second son from the second, like something like that.
It's an interesting ha'ara. I don't know. I haven't seen anyone that says anything like that. And I haven't seen a really good explanation for this kind of language.
Right, it's a weird language.
Yeah, for sure. V'lo halchu banav b'drachav, and his sons. This is there's a little tongue in cheek here because the last chapter, part of what made Shmuel so great was that he used to walk around and do like a circuit court judge, right? He literally traveled around judging people, and here we have lo halchu banav b'drachav. His sons didn't go, but literally didn't walk in his way. V'atu achreha.
Similar to Moshe.
Right.
Similar to Moshe or not similar?
Yeah, Moshe's sons also didn't go in his way.
No.
Oh, Moshe judging the people, right? Shmuel went and judged the people. Moshe had the people come to him. Yeah, that's fair.
But he judged everybody.
Yes, correct. Vayitu achrei habotza, and they went after the. So this is a very interesting choice of words. If you'll recall the story of the brothers selling Yosef, so what Yehuda says over there is ma betza, what will we benefit? What's the gain that we will get from killing him? Let's instead sell him. And that, I think, was the beginning of Yehuda losing the ability to be the ruler, losing the ability to be in charge until he earned it back. But that was sort of the big flaw that was held against him. And here, what is causing them to not follow in Shmuel's ways and be a leader is the same idea. They're following. Their concern is what is the batza? What's the financial gain? So they went after financial gain. Vaychu shochad, and they took bribes. V'atu mishpat, and they subverted justice. All of this Chazal really temper down and make it not as direct that they were actually taking bribes, but it's more they were taking payment for things that are not directly related to the court, but they were like investing with people, and then they would still.
They were upselling people.
No, they.
You're here in court today. If you would like to go to the head of the line, we have a lightning pass.
No, nothing like right. No, Chazal really minimized it. It's to the point of like, well, they wanted to have a nice fancy court, so they would hire a stenographer and they would have like all the accoutrement to make it a very fancy office because they enjoyed the fanciness of it. When really you're the judge and you shouldn't be wasting money on, it's like the charities that 80% of the money that's donated goes to the administration. Yeah, that kind of idea. V'yiskabsu kol ziknei Yisrael, and all the elders of the Jews come together via vo el Shmuel, and they come to Shmuel in Ramasa, which is where that's Shmuel's home. Vayomer elav, and they say to him, Hine ataza kanta, behold, you are old, in case you were not aware. Uvanecha lo halchu b'drachecha, and your sons are not going in your way. Ata sima lanu melech l'shaftenu kechol hagoyim. Now, establish for us a king to judge us like all the nations. So, as you might imagine, this doesn't go over so well in the eyes of Shmuel. V'yirah hadavar b'nei Shmuel kasher amru tna lanu melech, and this is bad in the eyes of Shmuel when they said, give us a king, l'shaftenu, to judge us. So what does Shmuel do? Remember, we also talked about this, that Shmuel was... No, Shmuel is was his whole creation is through prayer, right? That's his like superpower. So v'yispalel Shmuel el Adonai. So Shmuel davens to God, right? Like you said, go to the mikvah, I'll daven on it, right?
Right. Don't the Chazal basically give a drasha that it's just the words that like the other nations?
Right. So we have to understand a lot of what is going on
like
over
the other
here.
Nations. They said, give us a king because it's a mitzvah in the Torah. It would have been okay.
Right.
But like,
although in the Torah it says when you say you want a king k'chol hagoyim, right? We saw that.
right.
So it's hard. It's going to be hard to understand what they did wrong. Yeah. The thing that Rav Matas Weinberg points out over here is that this is actually a very high madriga, that the people could come to the leader and tell him your sons are not behaving well, means that Shmuel, they felt they could have that conversation with Shmuel, right? That this is something that they could tell him and they could feel comfortable telling him. It's a rough conversation, but it's an important conversation, and they felt that they could have that conversation with Shmuel.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure necessarily that they were right, but okay. The question that I'm going to ask at the end, and that I think
the reason it might have been bad in his eyes is because he had to face the truth of this stinks.
Well, okay. So the question I'm going to ask again at the end, but I want to let it percolate a little bit, is if we recall the whole story with Eli and his sons, forgetting the other lessons that we talked about in terms of the mistakes that Eli made. The very basic takeaway from all of that is if you're the leader, you're going to be held accountable for the actions of your children, right? That's clearly one of the things that was laid at the feet of Eli is your sons are doing wrong. The Navi didn't come to the sons of Eli and say, hey, do teshuvah. He came to Eli, right? And of all people on God's green earth who should really understand that message, it's Shmuel. Shmuel was the one who his first prophecy ever, and the prophecy was to him. The prophecy wasn't, hey, go tell Eli this. It was, hey, Shmuel, here's something I want you to know. Eli, his kids messed up, and he's going to be held accountable. Of all the people, let me just finish the thought. Of all the people to have his kids not go in his way, the last person you could possibly expect that out of is Shmuel. It's preposterous that Shmuel is, first of all, hearing about this from other people and not aware of it on his own, and second of all, of anything that Shmuel should be careful of in his entire life. Should it not be, and maybe to ask it in a stronger way, how, I'll kind of skip to the end, Shmuel doesn't get punished for this. Eli gets the worst possible punishment. Forever and ever, your family is cursed. Shmuel gets off scot-free. There is no statement in the psukim. There is no statement from Chazal that hold him accountable in any way, shape, or form for the thing that you would think, if it's good for the gander, right? If it's good for Eli,
he does die a couple of years after that. I mean, he doesn't exactly
True, but yeah, there was a couple comments.
Because if you look at that, and you look at Avram, and you look at Yitzchak,
a lot of people have this problem. It's also an interesting question. Why is it that all these leaders can't seem to get kids to follow in their footsteps? I agree with you. It's a problem. It's not just a Shmuel problem.
It's a realization that you're responsible for you, but really you're not responsible for your kids to that level.
Right. Well, the Torah says, fathers won't die for the sons,
yeah, for sure.
And sons won't die for the fathers. Everybody's going to die for their own sin, and yet
with Eli, that goes out the window.
And we see this. I mean, this whole idea of familial responsibility is being like, hey, we do have such a thing. Like the Torah's like, we don't really have that thing. Everybody's got to be good.
I think also again, it doesn't go into detail with Shmuel, but with Eli, it's not so much the result, but more the action. Like Eli's action towards his children seems a little bit more laissez-faire. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, yeah, and it didn't seem like he was. Shmuel doesn't really say whether or not he, did everything possible, went this, but
right.
It's just so. I think it's different. I think the situation with Shmuel is different than with Eli.
Well, Shmuel
at least his call to action was much more serious than Eli's was.
Okay, I mean Shmuel is
potential.
I hear you. It's fair. Shmuel is appointing his kids as judges, right? Like, if he knew that his kids are no good, maybe find another job for them other than essentially he's lining them up to be leaders, right?
Right.
It sounds to me, and you can tell me if you disagree, but it sounds to me like what he's trying to do is create a dynasty, right? I'm the leader, and if
Or,
you know,
or put them in a position that they need to live up to that.
okay, but it's dynastic, meaning the Rambam even paskins this lahalacha that anybody who's in a position of authority, their kids have the right to follow after them as long as they are equal to the father in learning and Yerushalayim and all that good stuff. But if we follow from Chana's tefillah that like, hey, I really want Shmuel to be a leader and the kind of leader who's sort of like a king, meaning like I guess one way to put it is king is sort of code for dynastic leadership, right? So if you are Shmuel and your mom was like, hey, I want you to be king, like, okay, that sounds great. I'll sort of be the king, and here are my kids. They're doing the same job that I'm doing. But the reason I point that out is to make things even worse, which is here's the
We're telling him
here's the line
better
of thought.
in the works. It's not going to work out that
Well,
way.
here's the other part we have to understand. The thought the thought pattern of the leaders of the Jewish people. Leaders of Jewish people see sons of Shmuel not so good, right? So they come to Shmuel and they say, you know, this whole thing you're trying to do with like dynastic leadership and your kid, we don't want that. We want actual dynastic leadership. We want a king, right?
Yeah.
If king is code for your kids will be king after you, you just identify the problem with that. The problem is you can have a leader whose kids are bad. In fact, we have seen that a few times already in the first 8 chapters of the book. So why would you then go and ask for the institution of it doesn't matter whether or not the kids are good or bad, they're going to be the king,
Yeah.
right? That's possibly the worst thing to ask Shmuel for, especially when the reason you're asking for it is because Shmuel's kids are bad,
Good point.
right? Fair?
Good point.
Okay. More to come on all of this. I'm not going to leave everybody hanging, but I am going to try to get through the parak and then
But
hopefully.
that's not true because
Yeah, yeah.
because while Shaul's kid, okay, Yonah's son, is not king.
But Shaul's other kid, Mephibosheth or Ishbosheth.
Yeah.
Okay, and David's oldest kids are not king.
Right. But they try to be king.
Right,
And
they try to be king, but they're not.
And it goes badly.
And then all the other kids after them are king. And almost without exception, the kings certainly of Yisrael are all bad, and
Yes.
most of the kings of Yehuda are bad, whether or not they're.
Yeah, that's accurate. But again, the dynastic part of it that you're saying has to be oldest and has to be that.
No, not that it has to be oldest, but that the son of a king has the opportunity to become king, whether or not he's a good person to be king.
Oh, okay.
It's in the Rambam. It's a Mishpat. It's halacha, and at least within the Yehuda, that it goes down.
Okay, let's try to get through the rest of the parak, and maybe we'll save some of these questions for next week. Vayomer Adonai el Shmuel. So Shmuel hears them. I don't like this. He goes to God. He davens on it, and God answers him. Shma b'kol ha'am. Listen to the voice of the people. L'chol asher yomru elecha. Everything they tell you. Ki lo oscha ma'asu. It's not that they are displeased with you. How do they translate ma'asu as rejected you? Ki osi ma'asu. Mimloch alehem. It's because they've rejected me to rule over you, and so it's nothing personal, Shmuel. But you got to do what they say. It's like everything else they've done. You can hear God just
It sounds like a frustrated parent.
Yeah, right, with his head in his hands. From the day that I took them out of Mitzrayim, ad hayom hazeh, v'yazvuni v'yavdu elohim acherim, they've forsaken me. They worship idolatry. Kain hema osim gam lach. They're doing the same thing to you. I've seen this 1,000 times.
It's kind of comical.
V'ata.
It's like he's commiserating with him.
Right.
You know, Hashem is commiserating with the Navi.
Right. He's like, look, there's nothing you can do. I've seen this 1,000 times. It's these people. They're whack.
You've seen the meme with the two guys from Oh Brother Where Art Thou with the noose around their neck.
No.
It's like it's a meme. It's like one guy with a noose around his neck looks to the other one and he's smiling and he's like, "Oh, is this your first time here?" like it's not his first time being tried and nearly hung for murder.
V'atashma b'kolam. Now listen to their voice. Ach ki ha'ed ta'id bahem. But you have to solemnly testify to them, warn them. V'higada lahem, and make known to them mishpat Hamelech asher yimloch alehem, the mishpat of the king. There's again a play in words over here. Shmuel was the shofet, and now he has to tell them the mishpat of the king. Asher Yimloch Aleim, who will rule over them. Vayomer Shmuel es kol divrei Adonai el ha'am, and Shmuel says everything that God said to the people hasho'alim me'ito melech, who are asking for a king. Remember, they didn't ask for a king; they said, "Give us a king." Kechol Agayim. And Shmuel is rephrasing it here as the fact that they are asking for a king. Why is he rephrasing it that way? Because we saw way back at the beginning this idea that Shmuel's naming convention came from the idea of Shoel, right? That he's Shaul la Hashem. So he is still kind of interjecting. By the way, guys, I know you're asking for somebody. I'm the guy who was named after asking. Maybe what you're really looking for is me. So he tells them over everything that God said, but it's hard to understand if he really told over everything God said, because there doesn't seem to be any mention of the fact that this is sort of like idolatry and that you're really forsaking God. It seems more like what he's telling them is, okay, God told me to tell you the mishpat Hamelech, I'll tell you the mishpat Hamelech. But even that, we read the psukim in the Torah. We know that the mishpat Hamelech is what? Give me some of the halachos of the king.
Not too many horses.
Not too many horses,
wives,
not too many wives. What else?
Not too much wealth.
Not too much wealth. What else? Has to be a Jew, right? He has to be Mikarav Achecha. What does he have to? What are the positive things the king has to do? He has to
Sefer Torah with
write
him.
a Sefer Torah and keep it with him all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty much.
Hakel.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's
No, it's two different mitzvahs. Hakel is separate than
is reading the
having-
Torah. One is having the Torah.
Sefer Torah with him. He has to have two Sefer Torah.
Okay, so if the educated reader would assume, okay, what is Shmuel going to tell them is the Mishpat HaMelech, some version of what we got in Dvarim. But that is not what Shmuel tells them. What Shmuel tells them is as follows: Vayomer Zeh Mishpat HaMelech. I've got some mishpat for you, says Shmuel. Asher Yimloch Aleim Es Benehem Yikach V'Samlo Merkavto Ufarashav V'Ratzu Lifnei Merkavto. He's going to take your sons, this king, and he's going to stick them as part of his charioteers and horsemen, and they will serve as outrunners for his chariots. V'lasumlo sarei alafim v'sarei chamishim. He's going to appoint them heads of hundreds and fifties. I'm sorry, of thousands and fifties. V'lacharosh charisho l'ksor katziro, and they're going to do all of his field work. They're gonna plow for him. Avlasos clay milchamto clay richbo, and they're going to do the smithing work. They're going to make his weapons and the equipment for his chariots. Vispanosechem, and what about your daughters? Yikach l'rakachot u'latabachot u'laofot. He's going to take them to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. There is one explanation of rakachot. Everybody has rakachot, all the Rishonim, as perfumer. In Dat Mikra, he offers this option as of rakachot being vinters, being makers of wine, spiced wine. To me, that's really interesting, because then you have kind of a parallel to Yosef, right? You have the Sarah Tabachim, you have the Sarah Ofim, and the
Sarah
Mashkim. Thank you. Vies sadosechem, vies karmechem, v'zeisechem hatovim yikach v'nasan lavadav, and he's going to take all your best stuff, all your vineyards, your olive groves, and he's going to give them to his servants, to his courtiers they have over here. V'zarachem.
Nothing about satraps here.
No satraps. V'zarachem v'karmechem yasor, and he's going to take a tenth of all of your grain and vintage, and he's going to give it to his eunuchs and courtiers. And all your male slaves, female slaves, and your young men. There's a difference in gears over here in the Septuagint for Bachurim, but the point is he's going to take all the stuff that you want. He's going to take all your stuff and use it for his work. So Nechem Yasor ve'atemti lo lavadim. He's going to take a tenth of your flock, and you shall all be his slaves. This is also very similar to Yosef during the years of plenty, and then finally the years of famine. Everyone had to end up selling themselves to Yosef because they had nothing left.
Incidentally, that slipping in that whole eunuchs thing. What's up with that?
What do you mean? It's people in sorry sub doesn't necessarily have to be like castrated eunuchs. It can just be people in the court of the king. Sometimes a suris is anatomically an anatomical reference, and sometimes it's just another euphemism for a servant in the king's court.
I'm just saying, like, 'cause we don't do that.
Yeah, no, we do. So that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Uza'aktem bayom hahu milifnei malkechem, and you're going to cry out when that happens before you are king. Asher bachartem lachem, that you chose for yourself, even though they said we want you to pick a king for us. V'lo ya'aneh Adonai eschem bayom hahu, and God will not answer you on that day. That's your mishpat Hamelech. So the question is, where does any of this come from? Who says the king has the right to do any of these things? Rambam brings this down, la halacha, that the king has these are the rights of the king. First of all, that's not mishpat. These are the king does not have to do these things, right? There is no commandment to the king, go out and take everybody's best crops and stuff. And
This sounds like a warning.
It is a warning.
yeah, it is a warning, but where does it come from? Did God say to say this? Did Shmuel pull this out on his own?
Not
He can't add to the Torah. Let's set some ground rules. It's an embellishment.
I'm saying
Right? Let's set some ground rules. The Navi is not allowed to create new halachos that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't give us. He gives over it, right? Now, if you want to say this is like I don't know, some sort of temporary, like to scare them because he's trying to get them to kind of rescind the demand, maybe, but to call this mishpat Hamelech is very hard.
Why don't you read it as if he received some type of nevuah and given over the nevuah?
Because the Navi can't have a new mitzvah. He can tell you this is what's going to happen, but to say that this is the mishpat, this is the halacha, that the Navi is not allowed to do.
Yeah, and
the
if
Navi
he does
can't
do
create.
it, it's a death penalty
Yeah.
if it's not what God said.
Okay, let's get through the rest. V'yima'anu ha'am lishmoa b'kol Shmuel, and the people refuse to listen to Shmuel, sort of like they refuse to listen to Moshe. Vayomru, and they say after Shmuel says all of this, lo, no, ki im melech yeh aleinu, we want a king. Like, I hear what you're saying, but no, just give us a king anyway. V'hayinu gam anachnu kechol hagayim, and then we'll be like all the other nations. Remember, the people that are saying this are not the Zakanim. It's very clear the Yimanu Ha'am. This is the regular folks. Ushaftenu Malkenu. And the king will judge us v'yatza lifanenu v'nilcham es milchamosenu. And he will go out before us and he will war our wars. He will fight our battles. Vayishma Shmuel es kol divrei ha'am v'dabrem baznei Adonai. So Shmuel hears this response to his mishpat, and he goes and puts it in the ears of God. There's some sort of like broken telephone situation going on over here where God says, okay, Shmuel, tell them something. And Shmuel tells him something that sounds radically different than what you would expect. And the people hear it and they say something and Shmuel goes and tells God. But did Shmuel tell God exactly what the people said? Vayomer Adonai el Shmuel, Shema b'kolam. God says, listen to what the people say. V'himlachtam lahem melech, and appoint for them a king. Okay, I'm going to stop in the middle of the pasuk here. What would you expect happens next? And Shmuel appoints a king, right? That sounds like, okay, God's pretty clear. He's told you twice. He told you before, and he told you after. So maybe what you should do is go appoint a king. Vayomer Shmuel anshe Yisrael, and Shmuel says, L'chu ish le'iro, go home. End of parak. Psucha. That's the end of the topic. Yeah, close the book. Mic drop. Go away. Shmuel says, okay, guys, I hear you.
I need to think for a few minutes.
Right. Shmuel says, I hear you. I spoke to God about it, and we're going to do exactly what God says. We're going to send everybody home. Right?
But again, he has to internalize this irrational approach of like, why do they want a king?
Well, it's not.
That's not what God said to do. God didn't say internalize rationally. God said
he's not going to be like. You know, if there's like 100 people, like Shmuel, give us a king. He's gonna be like, all right, that guy. All right, you know, like he's gonna actually. He's gotta. Yeah, there's gotta be a process. No.
Right.
So he's gonna be like, go home, guys. This is gonna take a while.
Spoiler alert: there's no process. Next chapter, Shaul loses some donkeys and he's king.
Yeah.
That's your process. Later, like after that, we actually get a process where there's like a lottery, and you know they draw straws and they try to find Shaul, and we'll get to all that.
What's driving the desire for a king?
You tell me? What's driving the desire for a king?
The whole guy to be like the other nation, right?
What were they lacking? Shmuel, remember, chapter 7, Shmuel just routed the Plishtim.
Well, the Plishtim first routed the Jews.
First the Plishtim routed the Jews.
Right.
Then the Aaron came back. Then the Jews got together and did teshuvah and were super awesome, fantastic. They got a gold star.
They're still thinking about the route.
They're thinking about the route. They're scared.
Right.
They tell Shmuel, like, oh, the Plishtim are coming. We're screwed. What should we do? Shmuel's like, no problem. Korban, Davin, great. God says, goodbye, Plishtim. Shmuel and the Jews with no weapons just go chasing the Plishtim. The Plishtim give up. We're giving you back all your land.
But they view it as an anomaly.
They
Probably.
Why?
Because then they wouldn't have to ask for a king.
So you're using your question to be your answer, right? Why do we want a king? Because of this anomaly. But who said there's an anomaly? Well, they're asking for a king, so it must be an anomaly. You see how it's like circular.
The mistake is that they think they need a king to
Yeah,
fight the wars.
circular
When Hashem
reference.
fights the wars for you.
Say that again.
They don't need a king to fight wars because Hashem fights the wars.
The old model was you have a shofet. If there's a problem, the
They
shofet will
can't
come
really-
and fight
they
for you.
can't really comprehend how they were victorious.
Because Hashem fought the war for them.
But they don't. They can't like sort of like.
That's their-
But Shmuel, even in
that's
that
to their
parak,
fault. That's to their fault.
in that
Right,
parak,
right,
Shmuel
right.
says
Right.
he calls the stone Evan HaEzer, and he says here up until here is where Hashem helped us rout the Plishtim. It was a complete success. Shmuel has not lost. Shmuel is like 1-0. He's never lost a battle against any foe of the Jews. And the next parak, they're like, no, this is no good. We need someone who's going to go fight wars for us.
All going.
Okay, Shmuel can't fight wars k'chol hagoyim?
No,
Why?
because he didn't.
What's the difference?
He went normal.
He's a
He
common
went
son.
God.
You're saying
Well,
we
God.
want someone who's not. That's
If
really
he's not
interesting.
what?
He's. I don't want to put words in your
Yes,
mouth,
that's
but
exactly what I'm
Shmuel won things supernaturally.
They don't
He
want
won
that.
through the help of God. We don't want help of God.
We want Kachal Gayim.
We get us.
That's
We
what
want
he wants.
Rambo. We want Rambo. It's very nice that you can beat all the
Schwarzenegger.
We want a Kachal Gayim. We don't want
through
Terminators.
natural means,
Right,
not
yeah,
supernatural
yeah.
means, right?
Because then
Yeah.
we're mechuyev.
Right.
There's no such thing. If they lose the war, it's because
Well,
Hashem
well,
wants them to lose the war. If they win a war, because Hashem wants them to win the war. When they lost to the Plishtim again, it's because Hashem,
We want
Hashem
Kachal
let them also.
Gayim.
And do they get it? I mean, they're asking. Remember,
Yes.
so Shaul, you would say, is a king k'chol hagoyim.
Kachal Gayim. He's got faults.
But why did they want it?
He's got faults.
He's got faults.
But does he win because of God, or does he win because of strategy and military tactics?
He has faults. That's what they're looking for.
He has faults.
He has faults
So why not pick Shmuel's kids? They have faults.
because they want Kachal Gayim. It's easy to have a to have multi gods where they're all fighting and all have fallacies.
Right.
They all fallacies. They're all wrong. You know, this one's doing this wrong thing and that one's doing that wrong thing, and so it's all good.
Right.
And then I can live a life.
Right. I can
It isn't
go under the radar. But when you've got Shmuel,
when you've got God who's good and who's going to decide right and wrong for you, you're in trouble.
yeah.
You're in trouble.
Okay, so we're a little bit out of time. I just want to do a quick chazara on our questions, and then please God, next week we'll work on some answers. The first question I think is why, of all people, why did Shmuel end up in a situation where his kids are not going in his way? And if for whatever reason it happens, why is Shmuel not punished for it? Why would the people demand dynastic leadership when the problem they're identifying is dynastic leadership? It seems that there's some sort of communication breakdown between what God is telling Shmuel to say, or what the people are telling Shmuel to say, and what is actually being conveyed back and forth. And then at the very end, how is it that God says appoint a king, and Shmuel says actually everyone just go home? Fair? To be continued. Okay, that's it for now. I'm so glad you were able to join us on this holy quest for a better understanding of Hashem's Torah.